All right, so the next talk is from Quentin Vacher, while we are opening the presentation. He's a security expert at Synacktiv, a company who is hiring a lot.
Don't ruin my slide.
Okay, sorry for that. Well, that was mine. Yeah. And yeah, the presentation is titled, if I recover, yeah, wireless infidelity, a return on experience. Floor is yours, basically.
Thanks. Okay, so hello everyone. So today we're going to talk a bit about Wi-Fi. So as he said, I'm going to talk about Synacktiv a bit. So I've been a pen tester at Synacktiv for 3 years now. I've done mostly Wi-Fi because my internship was on a tool that we use for Wi-Fi pen testing. So if you don't know us, Synacktiv is a company specialized in offensive security. We have around 190 experts today. And if you want to join us, feel free to apply. So first of all, I'm going to give a bit of context as to why we do Wi-Fi, although it may be obvious. Then I'll present two special use cases that we've had with Wi-Fi PSK, so personal Wi-Fi and enterprise Wi-Fi. And if I have time, I'll throw in some short stories, but I don't know if I'll have the time. So first of all, we mostly do Wi-Fi for usual pen tests in general because clients may be worried about the exposure it represents for them. And sometimes misconfigured AP networks are actually a big opening into their networks, but we'll talk about that later. And it's an interesting attack surface mostly for red team engagements because it's accessible outside the offices of our clients. So you can reach it from the outside. You don't have to perform any physical intrusion to get into to plug a device into their network, basically. It's generally less monitored. And as I said, the tool that we use for Wi-Fi pen testing is quite little, and you can put it in the backpack, and it's a very discreet way of getting an access. So the different types of Wi-Fi that we come across during our pen tests there's the open Wi-Fi that you see in public spaces, etc. There's web, so I know you may be surprised by this, but you can still see web sometimes. And so there's like the personal Wi-Fi, as I've said, and the enterprise Wi-Fi. So one has one password, and the other each user has its own password, but it shifts the security scheme. So just to clarify some terms, I'll often use AP for access points. Clients are basically the station devices, and I will most of the time shorten WPA2 to WPA, although it is deprecated as well. But we won't talk about those vulnerabilities in this context. So for the personal Wi-Fi, as I've said, as you may know, because all home routers use that, you have one password for all users. You connect. There is a key derivation based on PBKDF2, which makes offline brute forcing quite slow, by the way. And the main authentication is done during the four-way handshake, which proves both the client and the AP possess the same key. And apart from the PSK, there's only nonces and MAC addresses which an attacker can easily get if they capture the handshake. So basically, when you attack a personal Wi-Fi, the only thing you want is just capture a handshake, and then you perform offline brute force on it. So here's basically a graphic of how the four-way handshake works. So the first message contains a nonce. And then the M2 is used for the client to prove that he knows the PSK, and the M3 is the AP proving in turn that he knows the PSK as well, and the M4 is just an ACK. So basically, if you capture M1 and M2, or M2, M3, you should have enough material to brute force the PSK offline. And so basically, again, it's a very well documented process, but when you want to attack a personal Wi-Fi, the main thing that you do is basically you want to obtain a handshake and then perform brute force on it. So you can do that either by passive capture, the authentication. You can even put an evil twin, so just to trick a client into sending you the M2 message, and since no one ever just types in the message, you should have a valid PSK, a valid hash. And sometimes when there is no client, you can perform PMKD attacks. which are based on vulnerable roaming support, which allows to the IP basically sends you back a hashed version of the PSK. So one fun encounter that we had is we wanted to get into a personal Wi-Fi during our team engagement, but there was no PMKID and no clients. They stayed here for like an hour or so and they did not see any clients. And so my colleague asked me if we could like just try to connect. And so obviously, yes, you can, but it will be very slow. So we tried to just optimize that a bit, because the naive approach is just you launch a for loop of a WPA supplicant and you change the PSK each time. So it's going to be slow, but maybe we can upgrade that a bit. And so what we did is use WPA supplicant, but in daemon mode. So we had to patch WPA supplicant, it's a very short patch, to avoid timeouts, because otherwise if you put the wrong PSK, WPA supplicant will add a timeout each time it fails. And then we will control the WPA supplicant, which is in daemon mode, using Unix socket. So here's a very short view of the patch. So basically we just remove the part of the code that has auth failure and timeouts. And once you've done that, you just have to recompile the WPA supplicant. So here's an example of the configuration that you need. You just need to tell him, basically, I want to use a control socket, and you launch it in daemon mode, and then you can send commands. So I've put just an extract of the Python code, but basically, once you've set up that, you can communicate to it via a socket. So the send command is basically sending the packet into the Unix socket to control the WPA supplicant process. And so once you've done that, you just remove all the networks, you set the networks you want to target, and you can scan. And the advantage of this method is that you can scan, so the last command here, the scan command has to be done only once. And that's the main gain, because then you can just change the PSK, reassociate, and because there's no timeout, you will retry the four-way handshake instantly. And you gain a lot of time because of that, because you for loop only on the PSK and you don't have to relaunch a new process every time, etc. So it's still very slow, but we optimized it a bit, so it was cool. So the numbers I've put there are from a lab environment, so the reception is nearly perfect, because those were virtualized Wi-Fi interfaces. So we had an upgrade from 6.5 to 10 attempts a minute. It should be noted that in real environment, the overhead due to the scan of the Wi-Fi's around would have been much greater, so it could be a bit more profitable than this. But still, the Wi-Fi, the online brute force, the brute force of the connection remains really slow. But it allows to test in a decent amount of time. You could test like 100 passwords, which are based on a weak password that you could guess on the context of the company, etc. So it allowed to test that in a real environment from a backpack in real conditions. So it was quite cool, but it obviously remains really slow, and we did not optimize that more, because the handshake is ultimately handled by the Linux driver, which makes further improvement quite difficult. So obviously the solution, as you may all know, is you have to put a good Wi-Fi password, otherwise it's brute forceable. Or otherwise you could potentially upgrade to WPA3, which supposedly avoids handshake capture and offline brute force because of the Dragonfly protocol. And so to continue, we'll now go to the enterprise Wi-Fi. So as it is known, enterprise Wi-Fi uses the EAP protocol. So it basically authenticates each user individually, because the authentication is now handled through an authentication server, generally Radius, which provides access control based on each user. So now you have a better access control, but the security now relies on the correct configuration of each client, which can be a problem. So here's an example of how EAP works. So it's not a protocol in itself. Actually, there are several EAP implementation, which is a different protocol. So it's sort of a framework. there are different methods in EAP. So the most common and, by the way, the most secure is EAP TLS, which is a direct method. The user has a client certificate and authenticates to a server, which also has its own certificate. But some method that we see quite often are tunnel method, mostly a PAP MSCHAP v2, which is often used on Windows environments. So the first method, the phase one method, basically creates a TLS tunnel, and inside that tunnel, the credentials are passed using another method. So MSCHAP v2 is a Microsoft protocol, and GTC, for example, is just a clear text credentials, which is not good. And so that part, the phase one part, is the most common point of failure and the one that we always exploit when attacking enterprise network. So as you can see, the phase one is the part in red. Basically, when the client device connects, it tries to create a TLS tunnel towards the Radius server directly. And at that moment, the Radius server is supposed to give its server certificate, which the client should validate, but more often than not, it does not validate that certificate. It often comes from mobile devices, to be fair. Users just want to make it work, so they put do not validate the certificate, but because they have not the root and the CA of their enterprise, of their company inside their phone, and they just want to make it work. And once you do that, the attack is quite trivial. There are tools that already implement that, such as EAP Hammer. So it just pops a fake AP, and now you have a self-signed Radius certificate, which the user will accept. And based on the phase 2 method that is accepted, you can either get NTLM v2 challenge response hashes, which require offline cracking, or sometimes you can even get clear text credentials, which is quite nice. And by the way, in Windows environment, those credentials are often Active Directory domain accounts, which makes it even worse because once you're connected, you also have authenticated access to the Active Directory. But one time we encountered a very weird setup where instead of using user account, they used machine accounts, which is quite, which is nice because you could not brute force the password, obviously. But it used the PAP MSCHAP v2, and since it's based on NTLM, I thought maybe you can relate, but I did not know that it was possible until I saw a nice article from SensePost in 2019, which actually explains that it is possible, indeed because it is based on the NTLM challenge response scheme of Microsoft, which is known to be reliable. And they implemented two tools, so hostapdmana, which is the Evil Twin tool, and WPA sycophant, which is using WPA supplicant to relay the authentication to the real IP. And so that way you get an authenticated access on the legit IP, but without ever knowing the password, just by relaying the authentication. But one thing added to another, they also used WPA3 Enterprise, which was quite weird because I'd never seen WPA3 used by our clients. And so the problem is hostapdmana and WPA sycophant are both patch versions directly of the Linux's counterparts. So hostapd and WPA sycophant, WPA supplicant, sorry, on their 2.6 version, which did not support WPA3 at the time. So first of all, we had to know if it was still possible using on the WPA3 standard, because I didn't really know what it changed, and also can we make the tools work on WPA3. So as it happens, WPA3 for the personal Wi-Fi implements a new protocol which is called SAE, as I mentioned earlier. But for enterprise Wi-Fi, it's quite the same thing because it's still EAP and it's still the same protocols in the end which handle the authentication process. So actually, the main changes are just the management frame protection, which is enforced, and also the encryption method once the authentication is done and the key is derived is just stronger. So basically, you can relay it. So we had to patch WPA sycophant first. So here is just some diff commands. So since the tool is quite does just one thing, it was quite easy to make a diff of the WPA supplicant 2.6 and 2.11 and reapply the patch they did to WPA supplicant to the newest version. It worked quite fine. For host APD mana, it was quite harder because the tool does a lot more things. But in the end, with a lot of conflicts that we had to handle quite manually because it was some structures that had changed in the C code, we had to we made it work on the 2.11 branch. And once that is done, you can do exactly the same thing as they did with WPA2. So here's a legit configuration of both an AP and a client using the WPA EAP SHA-256, which is the config key for the WPA3 Enterprise on Linux. And using those relaying conf, so now we can use what they put in their wiki. You have to blacklist the MAC address of your evil twin so that your client will not reconnect to yourself. You configure the evil twin to relay the authentication to the client. And once you've set up that, so it was done in the lab again, so your host APD mana will receive the authentication. Once it's received it hands off the authentication to the supplicant. And once that is done, your supplicant is able to relay the challenge, and then you get an authentication succeeded at the end, so you get authenticated access to the network. So, yes. So it has to be noted, though, that in real conditions, it would be very hard to exploit, both because WPA3, as I've said, enforces management frame protection, so you're not able to de-authenticate legit clients and make them reconnect to your evil twin. So you basically just have to be there at the right time to be able to relay the authentication. And also you have to have a strong connection to both the client and the IP so that the whole process does not fail during the connection. And you only get network access, but still it works, and it was a fun use case. I wanted to share this. And finally, for the recommendations, so I would generally advise to use EAP TLS because it's just harder to misconfigure. And otherwise, if you really want to use PAP MSCHAP v2, you just have to trust only the corporate CA, please validate the certificate, and check the CN matches with your Radius server. And I can skip the conclusion. But basically, PSK is based on the strength of the password, and WPA EAP, you have to check the certificate. And if you want more details, you can check out my article, which is basically a longer version of this presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions?
Yeah, thank you for the talk. I was wondering, you said that there is no limitation on how many authentication you can try on Wi-Fi. Is it something noisy that is often detected by checking the logs, and can it be exploited in a red team stealth intrusion, or how often is it monitored?
Yeah, so as I've said, I do not feel like Wi-Fi is really monitored, even red team engagements. There's only one instance where we've seen it with Ubiquiti or something like that. They had a huge management panel where they can, each AP basically broadcasts several SSID, but they're also monitoring the Wi-Fi around them to detect if there is an evil twin. They can say, oh, this MAC address is not managed by me, by the central server, so this is potentially an attacker. But even then, my colleagues doing red team might not agree with me, but I strongly think no one checks that management panel. So yeah, it is noisy, and indeed we've tested on like home routers or things like that, and you can authenticate like 100 times in 5 minutes, and the router still accepts your connection. So yeah, there does not seem to be a lot of limitation, but it remains really slow.
Okay, thank you.
No more questions? Well, oh, okay.
Hello. As a Wi-Fi pen test expert, would you recommend taking the latest certification from Hack the Box regarding Wi-Fi penetration testing?
I've seen it only recently. There might be things I haven't mentioned, which when I wrote the articles, one of my colleagues told me, "Oh, you've not talked about this." So, for example, as I've said, there's the WPA, which is as outdated, and there are attacks on this to recover the key and try to decipher frames. I don't know if that's covered, but I think there's like WPS, so Wi-Fi protected setup, which has old attack on it to brute force the pin and stuff like that. So that might be things that aren't often covered, but otherwise I don't know, I haven't taken it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
No, there's one more question. No? Yes. No? There is one question?
Oh, yeah.
Thanks for the presentation. I just had a last question. Did you ever try to relay the NTLM out? And if so, to what kind of protocol can you relay it?
Sorry, I do not understand.
Did you already try to relay the NTLM authentication? And if so, to what kind of protocol does that work?
Well, it works when you have a receiving receiving an NTLM authentication. So there is just towards the authentication server. They've made the tool for this. Someone thought about implementing it, but it would be quite hard because it's not the same level. Like if you want to relay the NTLM authentication towards a LDAP server or something, it would be quite hard because to take the authentication from your WPA supplicant or your STPD, your evil twin, and relay it to something else, I think the delay would be too much. I mean, theoretically it could work, but I think it would be quite hard to implement, and also very hard to use an evil twin to get an authentication on the LDAP. Would be, I think, quite convoluted.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that was the last one. Thank you, thanks again.
Thank you.
So next speaker for the station.